theme I've applied to our analysis is the role of our personal moral perspectives in um, our life as a Jew. In other words, we feel certain moral feelings, certain things, that's right, that's wrong, something like that, our own feelings of what's right and wrong. And what's the role of that? So what we've seen is right now the dominant thing seems to be from the Rambam that it's a matter of consciousness. It doesn't really affect behavior as much. There's certain aspects of behavior, but the point is that our behavior is defined by Torah, but how do we read into that behavior? In other words, kashrus, we're supposed to perceive it as that we're doing it because God told us to do it. With murder, we're supposed to feel there's something wrong with murder. So we have this feeling. We're supposed to have this feeling that's attached to it. And then what we did see is Rashi then says is that feeling is you can go lifnim mishur sadin. You can apply that feeling in areas of the law or areas of behavior beyond the law. Okay, so that's what we saw in the sense that you can go beyond the law. And there's no halacha specifically. It says it develops as an idea. Okay, now that I developed this feeling, I know that this should motivate me in other areas. Okay, that seems to be that's the way Rashi seems to understand it. The Ramban seems to say something similar from his analysis of this pasuk. But the fact is he seems to say that the behavior itself is also very much defined by Torah. It's not just the feeling, it's the fact that from the behavior we learn certain things that are right to do. So it seems to be that according to Ramban, it's possible to see in the Ramban, I'm not saying this is absolutely the way he's defining it, but the fact is our behavior is still directed from Torah. And that's really what Torah is. Torah is behavior directives. It tells you what to do, what not to do. So the point is that you don't just give over feeling, but you have to give over behavioral directives. Okay, that's where we got up to. So the fact is now we come to the Sifri. And the pasuk says that we're supposed to do Yashar Atov Yashar B'nei Hashem. Okay, it's a pasuk in Torah. Perek Vav pasuk Yud Chet 6:18, and it says Kitasa Atov Yashar B'nei Hashem. And now the Sifri says, and over here in Nun Beit, over here in the Sifri. It says, this is, I think, Parshas, Bet Hanan, but Eichav, I think, maybe. Okay, it says, Kitas HaTov Yashar, see in Nun Beit, Kitas HaTov Yashar, HaTov B'nei Shamayim V'Yashar B'nei Adam, Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, HaYashar B'nei Shamayim V'Atov B'nei Adam. So it seems to be a machlokus, but both Skadim, both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael says that we're supposed to look at what people think. Okay? In other words, Rabbi Akiva is very straightforward. Hatov b'nei shamayim v'yashar b'nei adam. We have to understand what the difference is between Tov and Yashar. But the point is that...
What does that mean? Could you translate?
Tov is good and Yashar is straight.
No, this whole sentence.
Oh, okay. Hatov b'nei Shemaim, you should do what is good in the eyes of heaven. By Yashar b'nei Adam, and what is straight and proper in the eyes of man. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Rabbi Yishmael says, Yashar b'nei Shemayim should do what is straight in the eyes of heaven. V'atov b'nei Adam. They should do what's good in the eyes of man. So the question is what is Tov and what is Yashar behind it? But whatever they are right now, you see that how people look at you is a factor. Okay, it's not enough to sort of say I can discount all the infidels around me. Okay, because Bnei Adam is not just talking about people who are Bnei Torah. Okay, I'm using the word infidels because that's the in word today, right? The point is that you're supposed to do what is Yashar Beinei Adam, means the infidels. Okay, the people who don't necessarily, are not necessarily Maminim, not necessarily believers in God. Now, it gets to an issue of what about if they're all Menuvaldik anyways? I mean, the point is that if you're living in the time of the Mabul, right, and the people in the Mabul don't like what you're doing, well, you're supposed to look at the same aspect in terms of stone. Okay, in stone, they said, hey, listen, this is not right what you're doing. So that's going to be an issue. What happens if people are developing a things that are really a problem? Why do we care about them? But there seems to be that there's some positive concept out there that in the eyes of man, we are supposed to be considerate of it. So what exactly does that mean? Okay? So that, now the fact is that seems to go beyond just how you feel about it. It seems to be that that's a factor in your behavior. You're supposed to do what people will see as yashar. Okay, now Rashi is saying that's that's beyond the law, but it seems to be a factor within the law. It might be a factor. What happens if what people think is yashar is somewhat in conflict with Torah? Obviously, Torah takes is obviously paramount, but the fact is how you're supposed to respond to that, and we're going to have to deal with that. But let's look at the Malbim, okay? Because the Malbim is going to explain this, and then he's going to introduce something also that he seems to imply that the issue may be one of thought still, not necessarily behavior. Behavior is defined by halacha, direction of halacha, lifnim mishur, and so forth, but it might be in the idea of thought. So let's see what he says. It says, Kitasa, it's nun beit, right? Kitasa hatova yashar b'nei Hashem. Should do what is good and yashar, straight in the eyes of heaven. Tov shayich yoter al mitzvahs sheben adam l'makom. Okay? Tov applies to the mitzvot that are between man and God. She'ena osa otam mibnei yosher levavo. You don't do it because of your straightness in your heart, because you feel that it's moral in your heart, because of Yosher Levavo. Simply because you're commanded by the high wisdom, the basically the divine wisdom. Because knowledge of Tov V'Ra is in Chachma. Okay, so that's a very powerful statement he's saying here. It seemed to be that there are three categories of understanding why you're doing something. One is because it's yasher. You feel it's right or wrong. You feel it's right to do this. The other one is because it's Tzivui Hashem. You have no idea why you're doing it. God told you to do it, so you're doing it because that's the Tzivui Hashem. There's a new one that the Malbim is introducing, which is that you're doing it because of the Chachma Ha'elyon. You know that it's not just it's the command of God, it's the wisdom of God that you're relying upon. That God really knows the distinction between Tov and Yashar, and therefore He's the one who can clarify when you're doing something that's Tov or not.
What's the difference between 1 and 3? Between it's a commandment of Torah and you're depending on the wisdom.
Okay, so the fact is that's found in the literature between two different reasons why you follow the directions of God. The models that are used in the literature is Melech HaMetzava al Ha'am, the king who commands his nation, and the other one is Rofe Metzava al Ha'chola, the doctor who commands the chola, the ill person. Okay. The fact is that Melech Metzava al Ha'am, there is a concept of the authority itself. You do it because the king commands you, and there's an inherent right in following the king. That itself is correct. Okay, it doesn't matter whether this is. It's not because I know the king is wiser than me. it's because he's the king and he has the authority to make that decision. It's really a statement of authority. So when you say Melech Mitzvah Ha'am, you're basically recognizing God as the king of the universe and therefore has the right to legislate and command you. Okay? Rofa Mitzvah Ha'chola is basically, why do you listen to a doctor? Because he has wisdom, because he's smarter than you, he has more knowledge than you. So therefore, it's a matter where you're saying, since this person can make a better decision for me, I am relying upon his decision. So it's a different thing. When you go to a doctor says do something, you're not doing it because he's an authority figure, you're doing it because it seems to be the smartest thing to do, to listen to him.
But it seems to me that the metaphor doesn't work when you're dealing with God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're dealing with the doctor and the king,
right,
it's a good explanation.
Right.
But the assumption is God's authority and his wisdom are ultimate in either case.
Yeah, right.
You know, I mean, you may say, well, I'm not sure this doctor, I'll get a second opinion.
Yeah,
this obviously doesn't happen in the case of God.
Right, but I'll tell you where
God's expression of his authority is also an expression of his wisdom, is it not?
No, they're two separate ideas. I mean, they're integrated because of God. And the fact is that since he's all-knowing and you know, all-powerful, all-knowing, and whatever, therefore it's obviously integrated. But they do point out a distinction. There's a sefer that says that there's a whole big issue of...
The distinction is in our motivation, not really in God.
Well, no, there's also a distinction. There's also a distinction in terms of behavior. There's people who there's someone who wants to argue, and there's problems with this, whatever. But there's someone who says, I'm trying to remember who it was. There's a sefer I saw who said that the B'nai Noach, right? The Shem of this is B'nai Noach, is totally in the definition of Rofa Hamatzava Alachola. Okay? That it's all the doctor who commands over wisdom. Commands you because you're ill. Well, actually, there's interesting questions like this. There's an article someone once wrote for Nishma many years ago on the Jewish view of medicine. And he makes a distinction between the Eastern view of medicine and the Western view of medicine. He says in the East, obviously the Far East, you pay a doctor a sum at the beginning of the year, and his job is to keep you healthy. If he keeps you healthy, he does less work. He gets one sum no matter what. If you get sick, he has more work. Therefore, it's in his best interest. He's going to get the same amount no matter what.
The retainer.
The retainer is in his best interest to keep you healthy. So the job of that doctor is to keep you healthy. In the Western model, right, doctor theoretically wants to keep you sick because he makes more money because you pay when you're sick. I shouldn't, I'm not saying it that way. I used to make jokes about dentists that way. I mean, why are you pushing fluoride for him? I mean, it's less business for you, right? But the point is that that's the Western model. You pay when you're ill. So this person wanted to argue that if you look at a lot of things in terms of Jewish language of Rofe, such as this Rofe Matzav Alachola, it's a very interesting concept, because it makes more sense to understand that it's God telling you how to maintain health than responding to ill people. Okay, in other words, and he gives I forget this argument. He gives a few examples that to truly understand the term rofe, when we use it, it's not our view of responding to a doctor who's responding to illness. It's talking about a doctor who keeps us healthy. Okay, and that's our Kodesh Baruch Hu. Okay, but getting back to this thing of rofe, it's a command to do this. So there's someone who tries to point out that the Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach, and I have tremendous problems with this, and not just me. I mean, I think there's Moshe has tremendous problems with this and stuff like that. And anyways, but he tries to argue with Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach because it didn't rofe Mitzvah Al-Chola. Because of that, there's more flexibility in terms of B'nai Noach, because it may be in a singular situation, it may be that something else may be right. In other words, the doctor's right in 99.9% of the cases, might be a little bit different. So, and where he points this out he says this was the definition of how the Avos followed Torah before Har Sinai. We have a whole thing that the Avos followed Torah, right? Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov followed Torah. And there's a whole bunch of questions because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, there's a whole bunch of cases where they didn't do things. The most classic one being, the sisters. Yaakov marrying Rachel and Leah, a bunch of terutzim this way, that way. So this person wants to say that they followed Torah, but they followed Torah under Rofa Matzava Alachola. Okay, and therefore it wasn't an authority aspect; it was a wisdom aspect. So therefore, in a specific situation, God saying in general, this law idea of not marrying two sisters. So that's a general wisdom idea. But Yaakov Avinu, he argued, knew in this one specific case, this was the situation where he would not follow because he can make that decision not to listen to the doctor. If it was Melech Mitzvah ala Am, the tzivoy itself becomes the moral cause. Even if you have all the reasons in the world not to do it, right? The tzivoy, the fact that it's a tzivoy hamelech, it doesn't matter. That itself is the moral imperative. But if it's rofa matzava ahola, then it's because of the wisdom. So if you can give some reason that the general statement of wisdom is not applicable here, that's it. I mean, there's a thing where the Rambam says that mitzvahs, and it's some people find it very problematic. The Rambam says that a mitzvah is the best action for most of the people most of the time. Also, that means that there is a minority of people in specific time situations where it would not be the best to do the mitzvah. But the fact that the Rambam says, but still under tzivoy of a melech, you still have to follow it. In other words, wisdom can't be 100%. You can't say God else wisdom can't say this behavior is right 100% of the people 100% of the time. Okay? There's always going to be an exceptional wisdom. There's always going to be a situation where, for whatever reason, another action could be okay with that. But in the world of tzivoy of melech, the tzivoy hamelech always has to be, is by definition because it's tzivoy hamelech that itself carries the weight. So there's that concept over here, in terms of the idea. So when he says now he's saying that the idea tov ra. Now the point is, there's another aspect to this, which is it may be true, that maybe it doesn't work 100% of the people 100% of the time, but are you able to make that decision? Kosh Baruch Hu says, here's the mitzvah. Do you have enough information not to do it? I mean, that's really the issue by Shlomo Melech. He thought he had enough information in this particular case, and then he was wrong. But the point is that there's that argument that maybe you might be right theoretically, but can you make that decision given the fact that you really can't tell Tov and Ra?
I mean, it seems to me what you said, if you accept it, is very big concern. It implies that the Avos don't accept God as the ultimate king. They accept him
No. The fact is that
as an advisor.
What I'm really defining is I'm not trying to say they don't accept him as the ultimate king. What I'm saying is that there's a person who tries to explain why the Avos deviated from Torah when they accepted the idea of following Torah.
But that's a very dangerous explanation.
Right. Well, but okay. I mean, the fact is that I have problems with
because there's whole sects of Judaism that actually view the mitzvahs in that light.
Right. And the fact
is, consultative process.
Yeah, but he's saying the person who said this said post Sinai, there's a concept
that option closes.
Yeah, that option closes. He was just trying to explain that when the Avos accepted Torah prior to Matan Torah, okay, when they accepted it, it was a Kabbalah as Rof Mitzvah Hol. It was a specific. In other words, the definition of their acceptance prior to Sinai was in that definition.
When God says, "I put life and death in front of you, choose life."
That's Torah. That's Torah afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying. We don't view that as He's giving us a choice. We view that as a commandment to accept life. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically, but I mean...
Are there times explicitly where God doesn't give a commandment but gives advice that you can follow or not follow?
Well, he did, by shlachacha, by sending off the meraglim. He said, okay, you can make your own decision. The fact is...
Very rare.
Is that, the fact is that God commands. The essence of Torah very much is around the concept of tzivui, which is the concept of command.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with any reason for the command. It's just the command itself is the value. God says, jump, you jump.
Right.
Okay. And it seems to be that it doesn't necessarily even have to have a purpose. Okay? Now, that actually is the way some people understand the Hecht. The Hecht in other words, God tells you not to eat pork. There is the idea that there's nothing inherent in pork that's bad. There's no reason not to eat pork. The very value of not eating pork is solely found in listening to the command of God. He could have told you not to eat turkey. He could have told you not to eat chicken. He said don't eat pork, and there's no reason. That's the way some people want to understand that concept. Okay? The Rambam doesn't want to understand it that way. The Rambam says, yes, there's that concept, but everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you to do is because of His wisdom. He doesn't arbitrarily just say, don't eat pork. There's got to be some reason why God chose not to eat pork, or stated not to eat pork. There's a reason for it. The problem is we just don't know that reason. So that's what the Malbim is introducing over here. He's basically saying that there is the concept of doing it because it's a tzivui. There's a concept of doing it because it's tov. And tov is a wisdom concept. That God is telling you this, it's wise to do this, there's a reason for it. The problem is why can't we make that decision? Because we can't determine what's tov and ra. Because that comes out of chachma. And it comes out of divine chachma. So it's a knowledge that's out there, we just don't have it. Okay? And that's what he says. That's why the Malbim continues. He says, "Shekol davar shel chachma yeshvo shnei drachim, echad tov ve'echad ra." Okay, v'i efshar sheyasik adam me'atzma ma tov u'ma ra. Tov and ra are definitions that are beyond our knowledge. Okay, therefore God, when He informs us of a mitzvah, is also telling us some insight into the concept of tov and ra. That's the way he's understanding it. In other words, one thing he's understanding. So there's the tzivui, but in this pasuk, when it says tov b'nei shamayim, it's telling you there's something you're supposed to pull out of this called tov, which you can't figure out, right, by yourself. Rak al pi hachma v'torah Hashem k'mashikasu peretz sefer mishlei. Okay? The only way you can figure that out is from God. Now that might be a concept where he's saying where some concept like the Ramban will talk about Kedoshim to you. We from mitzvot learn something about Tov and then supposed to apply it. And this Tov has nothing to do with our own personal feelings. We don't have a feeling about it. We just learned it's the right thing to do. From our learning of Torah we get to a concept of what Tov is. Okay?
Or it's in our best interest.
Or it's in our best interest. Because Tov also has that aspect to it as well. There's two aspects to Tov. It's interesting because the Rav, most people when you talk about the Eitz Das Tov Ra, the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, most people say good and evil. Rav Yosef Bear, I saw it says there's another definition of Tov Ra, beneficial and unharmful. So he says it might be the tree of knowledge of what's beneficial and what's harmful, or what you like and what you don't like. Okay, or what's good or what's bad, not in the sense of good and evil, but in the sense of good and bad, in the sense of I like this, I don't like that. And he says, and that approach really changes much of what happens over here, in terms of the dynamic of understanding that story. That concept changes it. In other words, it's no longer learning good and evil, but it's learning sort of like feelings of what you would like and what you don't like. Okay, but the fact is that it's but the fact is what's really Tov and Ra is from a Chachma, and that we can only gain from Torah. Okay, Torah being B'nei Shemayim, that we can only gain from Torah. Now, I have a problem with that definition because of the very definition of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. From the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, what happened? They got knowledge of Tov and Ra. Right? So the point is, it seems to be that there is something about Tov and Ra that is inherent. Okay? So the point is, I have issues about that in the sense of this definition of Tov and Ra. Then how do you deal with the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra? Because it's true. But on the other hand, if you remember what the Nachash says, is V'yitek Elokim, you become godlike. Right? So there is an aspect of a certain divine knowledge of Tov and Ra. But it's really very different than moral. Now, this may have something to do, just to give an idea here, is in terms of our present morality. Morality in our world today is defined solely by relationships with other people. What happens in your own personal life is now considered to be outside the realm of morality. And this is really part of the sexual revolution, right? The sexual revolution, really the morality of the sexual revolution dealt with actions that weren't harmful to anyone else, right? There were laws about what you could do in your own private bedroom, right? The point is nowadays the morality today is only if you harm someone. But a morality that doesn't involve you hurting anyone else,
victimless
right?
crime.
A victimless crime, that we have problems with defining that as morality. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of Tov and Ra. The morality of something that's just not harmful to anyone is under attack. And it seems that Yosher, now you see further, this leads into what the Malbim is now going to say. And then what is he going to say? Val mitzvah sheben adam lachaver sheyasharim nikar livnei adam, and the mitzvahs between man and his neighbor that are yasher, that are not seen by bnei adam, all human beings, shayach lashon yasher. That you can have the lashon yasher. Vayosher hu bina ken hagazeh zu yasik bebinas levavo, and that comes from bina, not chachma. So here the Malbim makes a distinction between bina and chachma, right? And what I'm saying over here is that bina is much more of a having davar mitoch davar, to sort of see differences. It's much more. It might be a little bit more of an intuitive concept. You talk about women have a bina yisera, have an additional bina. So the point is that you with binas levava, you sort of feel that's wrong. Okay, or you sort of say, but that's always between people. So it might be that he's defining two different types of morality. There's a morality that's tov, that comes from chachma, and may be involved with things which were victimless. And that tov ra is under attack because it's not necessarily from your feelings. If you follow the whole development of the sexual revolution, all that happened was people asked why. Right? People say, well, why can't I do that? What's really wrong with that? And I remember one time, give an example. I was once doing a class to some senior citizens. They used to have the senior citizen group at the JCC, in Toronto there, and they asked me. This is years ago. They asked me to meet with them every once in a while. They had different Rabbanim coming in to speak, so I used to come in and speak. And I wanted to deal with something of this issue. So I asked this group, and these were senior citizens. I said, what's wrong with incest? And the first thing they said, what they talked about was basically focused on abuse. Okay? A father abusing a daughter, or something of that nature. It's abusive, it's underage, it's all that. I said, no. I'm talking incest. Let's take a case where you have a 29-year-old guy who wants to marry his 26-year-old sister. Okay? The people they had an uncomfortable feeling, but the children will be what do you call it? The genetic problems, stuff like that. So I said, okay, let's say let's say they can't have kids, or let's say they agree not to have kids, or let's say they'll do amniocentesis before having a child. Okay, it leads into abortion, whatever. But it's basically saying, take away. They say they'll practice birth control. Okay, it's another issue. But the fact is, let's say they're not going to have kids. What's wrong with this? And these were senior citizens. I mean, you're not talking about groovy guys in the coming out of the 60s. These were people who were adults already in the 50s. And like totally like. I guess, no. What's wrong with it? They were all sort of like, yeah, I can't say anything wrong with it. Because there was no one being heard. So that tells you, because, but the point is what I would say in that room, they still had a gut feeling about it. That there's a gut feeling that, I'm not comfortable about it. Right? But they could not give a chachmar. So this is very interesting, because the Malbim seems to be saying that there were two levels of morality. There's a binas levavo, which is sort of like a reaction to it. This is wrong. Okay? And that usually is when there's that may apply to many things, but you can't really explain it. You can't give reasons for it. Okay? So therefore it can waver, or it can stuff like that. There's other things which you can explain, and that's really what's changed in our world. We have gut reactions still, but we say that's disgusting, but we don't have an argument for it, so that's under attack. But there's still aspects of feeling things. Anyway, so the point is he says yashar is something we have this reaction to, which is maintained, and usually it's maintained longer because it's a matter of a victim. And it's Ben Adam L'Chavera, that's the one that's going to stay the longest. Mm-hmm. And then there's Tov and Ra that comes from Chachma. Okay? So that's what he says the difference is. And therefore, you are supposed to do what's Yashar B'nei Adam. So if people have a gut reaction to something, or they feel that there's something wrong about something, you're not supposed to do it. So it seems to be a behavior indication. Okay, which seems to imply that even if it's mutter l'halacha, you should not do it, and that seems to be the thing Shur did. But we're going to get back to this. What about if that gut feeling is contrary to the halacha? Now, Rabbi Yishmael, what does he say? Now, you think Rabbi Yishmael is going to change, but Rabbi Yishmael does something very interesting. Heishiv halo poksi vayasher b'nei Hashem. Doesn't it say here should do straight into the eyes of God? In Cain b'nei Hashem b'tzayin es hayasher lo es hatov. It has to be b'nei Hashem that you perfected the yasher, not the tov. A korchacha. So what does it mean yasher? Because yasher, he says, means doing what's straight, coming from the feeling. Amar shayasher hu b'nei shemayim v'atov hu b'nei adam ratzal omer sha'ash av shemitzvahs ben adam l'makom no nasi gishara. Right? Even though in the commandments between man and God, you can't figure out why it's yasher. You don't have that gut feeling why this is the right thing to do. V'yitztak aleim yoter shem tov. And it's better to put the word tov on them. We have to take the ben adam l'makom, the things we don't understand, and we have to try and understand them. We have to find a reason why this sounds moral. Okay? In other words, don't eat pork. We have to find a morality to not eating pork. Okay? It can't be the underlying reason we do it. It can't be the tam and the mitzvah. But we are supposed to, even with chukim, to try and understand why they make sense. Okay? As if you knew it from the straightness of your own heart. And the commandments between man and his friend. Even though we already feel why that's right. We should do it. We should have it that we don't just do it because it makes sense to us. We should just do it because that's the command of the divine wisdom. Okay? Okay, so from the pasuk over there in In Tehillim, he says he learns that Mishpotav are supposed to be recited, and Chukosav you should not push them away. You should still try to understand. V'itihu Mimashakasav Yasher B'nei Hashem. He learns that from Yasher B'nei Hashem. And then he says, V'hinei Rabbi Kiva Yesh Lamer Samach Mashakasav V'malo. And Rabbi Akiva, he figured it out from what it says beforehand. Ha'asita Yasher Tov B'nei Hashem. You should do what's straight and good in the eyes of God. Okay? And he's going back to what in the book says. Really what the Malbim is going to end up over here is that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel both are basically working where you learn this concept from, but he's basically saying that there are certain mitzvahs that you have a gut reaction to, that's the right thing to do, and there are certain mitzvahs you don't have a gut reaction to. The mitzvahs you have a gut reaction to, you're supposed to recognize, you're also supposed to have the idea, I'm only doing because God commands it. So you sort of sit there and not just rely upon your gut reaction. And the mitzvahs that you don't have a gut reaction to, you're supposed to work on trying to understand the gut reaction. So the fact is, he's basically saying that it's a matter of your mind. Okay, that in any way you're supposed to try and have both concepts whenever you do a mitzvah. Okay, whether it's Ben Adam Machaber, Ben Adam Mamaka. If you don't understand, so you're supposed to work on it to try and understand it. Not like most people understand Nasa v'Nishma. Nasa v'Nishma, most people understand is just Nasa. Nasa v'Nishma is, I'll do it, but I have to try and understand why. Maybe I can never understand it. And even those things which you think you understand, you're supposed to recognize it's from the Tzivah Hashem. Okay, so what the Malbim is really doing here is he's taking this concept and he's developing a new consciousness to the mitzvahs. It doesn't seem to say. He doesn't seem to just leave with Hayasher B'nei Adam. You're supposed to do what's right in the eyes of man, but it seems to be that he's taking it to a level where he's saying that there's a consciousness supposed to involve you. Hayasher B'nei Adam is somehow you're supposed to have a consciousness of man, and you're supposed to be aware of ethics. But you're also supposed to understand that God is beyond ethics. And therefore there's a perception of following because God told you. Now that creates a complexity. And I'm going to get more into that complexity. Because the fact is essentially that complexity becomes extremely significant in terms of understanding issues when things are in conflict. Okay, you can think of situations where things are in conflict. The Akeda is a classic example of our ethical perceptions being in conflict. The case of a guna is for some reason, the idea that we have that the idea of having this woman never being able to get remarried is something that bothers many people for a reason. It has something to do with our moral sensitivities. The fact is, it seems to be that when you have cases such as a guna, it's almost told that you're supposed to have a moral sensitivity, even though it's connected to halacha. Now the truth is, if you look at many shalos and shuvas sforim, the posek tries to find a heter because he has a certain sense of a moral sensitivity, where he's not, because of his moral sensitivity, he's not happy with the halachic conclusion. So the fact is that there are cases of conflict. Obviously, halacha taking the paramount position. You have to follow halacha. A guna, you can feel sad. I'm sorry, but she still can't get remarried. Okay, but that leads us to a very interesting case. We'll end on this note, and that's this article over here that I handed out to you. It's called Defining Chilul Hashem. And I don't know for kosher tube, you might want to check to see if it's on the Nishma website. I'm not sure if it is or not, but it's called Defining Chilul Hashem. I think it is on the Nishma website. So if you go to www.nishma.org, you can take a look at the article. Search for Defining Chilul Hashem, or just search Chilul or whatever. It's in the update 5756 number 1. But the thing is like this, is the Chilul Hashem presents a different model. You have a situation where halachically something, the one we're going to be looking at, the Chil Hashem we're going to be looking at, is something that's totally permitted. It's permitted, right? But because we're concerned about Chil Hashem and the fact that people will perceive it as something that is wrong, right? We should not do what is halachically permitted, but meet the standard of the Chil Hashem. So if the Chil Hashem is a moral standard that we should meet, because people are saying, hey, how is it that the Jews aren't acting that way? Well, why isn't it incorporated in the halacha? Why is it you have a... So we found that there are situations where you have this idea of morality being in conflict, or moral sensitivities being in conflict with the straight halacha, and the point is why does it exist that way? And what I'm basically doing by presenting the Malbim and so forth is laying down a foundation that the whole moral concept of human beings is a matter in flux. It's we have a sense of it, and we're also supposed to not have a sense of it. That there's something we can understand about it, and something we can't understand about it. And that creates a flux. Now, in certain ways, it's a flux that maintains our own humility in the sense of the moral perception. But we'll do more on this next week when we deal with Chil Hashem.